Snow fell heavy that night, a muffled silence pressing down on the endless forest, broken only by the cry of a child and the harsh laughter of men. They had dragged her by the hair, her arms clawing desperately around the small bundle pressed to her chest, and when they grew tired of the struggle, they beat her until her body folded like brittle wood. The baby whimpered, muffled by cloth, and that sound seemed to fuel the cruelty of the men rather than soften it. One of them struck her across the face and muttered that no woman should bring a child into the world without a man's claim. They shoved her into snow as if discarding a broken tool, then turned their horses toward the dark trail. She lay there with her cheek against ice, her blood mixing with snowflakes, and when she lifted her eyes, she saw the shapes of wolves slinking from the tree line, shadows with glinting teeth, hunger burning in their eyes. The men rode off, leaving only hoof prints and a curse hanging in the air. The woman clutched her baby tighter, pressing the child's head into the folds of her torn shawl. She whispered to her, though her lips were cracked and bleeding, words half prayer and half lullaby. The wolves crept closer, circling, growls rumbling in the stillness. Their breath steamed in the night air, and their paws patted over the snow with dreadful patience. She had no weapon, no strength left. Her heart thudded, not for herself but for the small life in her arms. She thought perhaps this was the end, that the wilderness would devour them as men had tried. Then came a crack like thunder, sharp and sudden. One wolf yelped and tumbled into the snow, and the rest skittered back with startled growls. From the dark timberline stepped a man tall as the trees themselves, a rifle smoking in his hands. His face was lost beneath beard and shadow, his coat stiff with frost, but his eyes gleamed with something fierce, not cruel. He fired again, and another wolf rolled lifeless into the drift. The pack hesitated, circling wider, but the man kept his stance, boots rooted in the snow, every movement measured and sure. The wolves read the promise in his shoulders, the certainty of death if they dared. One by one, they melted back into the trees, their howls fading into the distance. He lowered the rifle but did not step closer at once. His breath came in visible clouds, his silence heavy as the falling snow. She tried to speak, but only a rasp left her throat. The baby whimpered again. That sound seemed to push him forward, slow and deliberate, until he knelt before her. Up close, he smelled of wood smoke and leather, of iron and pine. His gloves were rough as he lifted her gently from the ground, checking the child still pressed against her breast. His touch was firm yet careful, as though he feared she might break apart in his hands. Without a word, he wrapped his heavy coat around both mother and child, then hoisted them into his arms. Through the forest he carried them, boots crunching over snow, rifle slung back over his shoulder. The night deepened, and with it came the sound of distant wind pushing through the mountains. She drifted in and out of awareness, head against his chest, hearing the steady rhythm of his heart beneath layers of wool. At times she thought she was dreaming, for no man had ever held her with such quiet purpose. The baby stirred, then fell asleep again, cradled in warmth. They reached a cabin hidden in the folds of pines, smoke curling from its chimney. The man shouldered the door open with a grunt and carried them inside. Heat from the fire wrapped around her instantly, a contrast so sharp she gasped. The place was small, built of rough-hewn logs, smelling of resin, tobacco, and old ashes. Animal hides covered the walls. A table sat warm but sturdy in the center, and tools gleamed from their hooks. He laid her carefully upon a bed of furs near the hearth and pulled another blanket over her and the child. She tried to sit, but pain stabbed her ribs, forcing a cry from her lips. He hushed her, not with words but with a gesture of his hand, a stillness that seemed to say, "Rest, you're safe now." He stoked the fire, then moved with practiced calm, gathering cloth, water, and a small tin box. Kneeling at her side, he began to clean the blood from her face. His hands, though calloused, moved with surprising tenderness. When the cloth touched her swollen cheek, she flinched, but he steadied her with a low murmur, voice gravelly as rocks in a stream. It was not the voice of a man who spoke often, but it carried weight. She watched his eyes as he worked. They did not wander, did not linger where they shouldn't. They focused only on wounds and the task of mending them. For the first time in many years, she did not feel like prey beneath a man's gaze. The child stirred, fussing, and he paused to fetch a kettle from the fire. He poured steaming water into a cup, then set it beside her. From a shelf he pulled dried meat and bread, placing them within reach. She could not eat yet, her throat raw, but the thoughtfulness pierced her more deeply than cruelty ever had. She whispered a thank you, though the word cracked as it left her lips. He only gave a small nod, as though gratitude embarrassed him, then turned back to tending her cuts and bruises. Hours passed in the silence of firelight. He boiled water again and stitched a gash along her arm, his large hands precise despite their size. She gritted her teeth against the needle, but he worked quickly, not dragging out the pain. When it was done, she sank back into furs, exhaustion pulling at her. The child nestled against her, warm now, breathing softly. The man pulled the blanket higher over them both and rose to check the door. Outside, the wind had risen, carrying the far-off howls of wolves once more. He stood there a long while, silhouette against the flames, listening as if measuring the world's threats by sound alone. She studied him in the glow. The lines on his face spoke of years carved in hardship, and the scars across his knuckles hinted at countless battles. He moved with the quiet assurance of someone who had learned to depend on no one but himself. And yet, there was something in the way he had wrapped her child in his coat, in the way he checked the latch twice before sitting, that spoke a heart not yet hardened into stone. She wondered what had driven him into these mountains, what ghosts kept him here among snow and silence. When her voice returned, she asked softly, "Why did you help us?" The question hung between them. He did not look at her at first, his gaze fixed on the fire. Finally, he said, "No one deserves the wolves." His words were plain, but the way he spoke them made her believe they carried weight beyond the night. Sleep crept over her, but fear still coiled inside. She worried the men might return, that their laughter might echo again through the trees. The man seemed to sense it. Before she drifted fully into dreams, she heard him place fresh wood on the fire and settle against the wall with his rifle across his knees. He would not sleep. He would watch. Morning brought a pale light through the frost-crusted window. She woke to the smell of venison stew simmering on the hearth, the baby cooing in her arms. The man sat at the table, sharpening a knife, the sound steady and surer. We noticed her eyes open. He rose and brought a bowl of food. She managed a few bites, warmth spreading through her belly. He watched only long enough to see she could eat, then turned away, as if afraid his attention might weigh too heavy. The hours of daylight stretched quiet. He left briefly to split wood, each swing of the axe echoing sharp through the cold air. She wrapped the child tighter and watched from the window, marveling at his strength, the rhythm of his movements, the way he carried burdens without complaint. When he came inside, cheeks red from wind, he stamped the snow from his boots and set the logs near the fire. Their eyes met for a heartbeat longer than before, and she felt the faintest flicker of safety stir within her chest. By evening, the sky bruised purple and gray, wind rattling against the cabin walls. She asked him again who he was, but he only shook his head, as though names mattered less than actions. Still, she wanted to know more of the man who had pulled her from death's grip. She told him instead of herself, halting words spilling like confession. She had been alone since her husband's death, forced from her land by men who claimed it as theirs. The child had been her only anchor, the reason she had endured, but the world had not forgiven her for surviving without a man's shield. The beating had been their final punishment, a warning to others who might follow. He listened without interruption, eyes steady, hands folded. His silence was not empty. It was a vessel, holding every word she spoke. When she faltered, his gaze did not waver, as if lending her strength simply by remaining. For the first time, she did not feel ashamed of her scars. She saw them reflected in his own, and together they seemed less damning. Night came again, fire casting gold across their faces. The baby slept soundly, cheeks flushed with warmth. She lay against the furs, staring at the ceiling beams, when he finally spoke more than a sentence. "This land takes from everyone," he said, "but sometimes it gives back." She turned her head toward him, meeting his eyes, and though no smile touched his mouth, she thought she saw a glimmer of it in his gaze. When sleep finally claimed her, it was not the sleep of fear, but of fragile hope. He remained by the fire, watching, rifle across his knees once more. The wolves might circle again, the men might return, but in that moment, beneath the roof of rough logs and the warmth of flame, she and her child were no longer alone. And the man who had once built his life upon silence and loss felt the stirrings of a vow deeper than words, that as long as he drew breath, no harm would touch the woman or the child in her arms. The days that followed were marked by silence and small rituals, the kind that knit strangers into something more. He rose before dawn to cut wood, his axe echoing against the stillness of the pines, while she tended the child and kept the fire alive. When he returned, his arms laden with logs, their eyes met briefly, carrying unspoken gratitude. She had begun to learn the rhythm of his movements, the way he placed each tool exactly where it belonged, the quiet patience that shaped every action. Though words were rare, each gesture between them carved trust slowly, like water cutting through stone. The child grew more restless as the cabin became a prison of snow and wind. Her laughter, soft but insistent, brought something unfamiliar into the man's chest, a warmth he had not felt in years. He found himself lingering by the cradle of furs, watching tiny fingers grasp at the air, and when the baby's small hand curled around his finger, he felt a jolt of something dangerous, the ache of belonging. He pulled back quickly as it burned, but the memory of that fragile grip followed him into sleep. For her, safety came laced with unease. She knew men could change like weather, kindness one day, cruelty the next. Yet as she watched him mend the torn coat, needle in hands rough as bark, she saw nothing of the temper or carelessness she had endured before. He did not drink himself senseless, nor raise his voice to command. His strength was not the kind that demanded fear, but the kind that bore weight without complaint. Still, she kept a careful distance, not ready to believe fully, not yet. Trouble arrived not in the form of wolves, but of men. One morning, while gathering water from the frozen creek, he found a mark carved into a tree, a circle crossed with 2 slashes, fresh wood exposed beneath bark. It was no hunter's sign. It was a message, one he had seen before. The men who had cast it to the wolves had returned to stake claim. He stood by the tree for a long moment, jaw tight, before erasing the sign with his knife. When he returned to the cabin, he said nothing, but his eyes lingered longer on the window, and his rifle remained closer at hand. That night, she noticed his restlessness. He paced a small room before settling at the fire, shoulders taut, gaze fixed on flames. When she asked softly if danger followed them, he gave no answer, but the silence was enough. Fear spread cold fingers around her heart. She held the baby closer, listening to the wind rattle the logs. She wanted to believe they could hide forever in this cabin, but the world had already proven its cruelty. The men would not forget, and the wilderness did not forgive. The first confrontation came at the river valley, where he had gone to check his traps. He sensed them before he saw them, shadows slipping between the pines, rifles glinting in the pale light. A voice called out, mocking, asking if he enjoyed stealing what belonged to others. He did not answer. Instead, he took cover behind a fallen log and waited. The gunfight broke quickly, a crack of shots echoing through the valley. He fired with precision, each bullet placed, but they were many, and he only one. A shot grazed his shoulder, spinning him half around, pain searing hot. Still, he fought, driving them back until the sound of hooves retreated into the trees. When he returned to the cabin, his coat was torn and blood seeped down his arm. She gasped, rushing to his side, but he waved her off, though his steps faltered. She refused to listen to his stubbornness. With trembling hands, she cleaned the wound, stitching it closed despite his grim silence. As her needle pierced his flesh, she whispered that he'd saved her once, and now she would not let him fall. He watched her face as she bent over him, strands of hair falling loose, eyes narrowed with determination. Something stirred inside him again, something he thought long dead, and he wondered if this was what it meant to be needed. The cabin grew tighter after that. Every creak in the woods set nerves on edge. He taught her how to load the rifle, how to steady her breath before squeezing the trigger. At first, she protested, saying she had no wish to take life. But he told her softly, almost regretfully, that survival gave no choice. She practiced, hands shaking, until the weapon no longer felt foreign in her grasp. Watching her aim, the child gurgling at her feet, he felt a strange pride. This woman who had been beaten and discarded now stood taller, strength kindling in her eyes. But the man did not relent. One evening, while he was out gathering wood, smoke curled into the twilight from a far ridge. He smelled it first, acrid and heavy, then saw the glow of fire. His trapline burned. The snares and pelts he had labored for reduced to ash. Rage, cold and sharp, cut through him, but beneath it lay fear. They were closing in, inch by inch. He returned to the cabin with his jaw set, telling her they must prepare. She looked at him then, the firelight catching the bruise still fading along her cheek, and for the first time she did not tremble. She nodded, holding her daughter tighter, ready to face what came. The ambush arrived in the canyon. They had set out for the trading post, supplies running thin, when riders blocked the path. Gunfire burst from the cliffs, bullets sparking off stone. He shoved her behind cover, shielding both her and the child with his own body as shots rained down. His rifle barked in reply, echoing thunder through the gorge. She clutched the baby close, whispering frantic prayers, while he fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. A bullet struck near his feet, scattering rock. He moved them deeper into the canyon, each step a struggle against overwhelming force. The sky darkened with storm, snow swirling down in blinding sheets. Using the weather as ally, he led them into a hidden cave, the cold cut to the bone, their breaths pluming in the darkness. He collapsed against the wall, blood from a shallow wound staining his shirt. She tore cloth from her dress to press against it, her hands firm despite the shaking. The baby whimpered, hungry and cold, but alive. She pressed her body against his, sharing what warmth she could, their breaths mingling. In that closeness, words became unnecessary. Their survival depended not on promises, but on the steady rhythm of each other's heartbeat. When the storm cleared, they returned to the cabin battered but alive. Days passed in tense quiet. The baby's laughter still broke through the silence, a fragile light in the gloom, but both adults carried the weight of coming reckoning. She began to see him not only as protector, but as man, scarred yet unbroken. She saw the grief etched in his features when he thought no one watched, and she understood that loss had driven him into solitude. Her hand brushed his once as she passed him a cup, and instead of pulling away, he let it linger. That fleeting contact said more than any vow could. The final confrontation came sooner than either expected. One night, while snow drifted thick and heavy, the men surrounded the cabin. Flames licked at the walls as they set torches to the logs, their laughter cruel and triumphant. He shoved open the door, rifle blazing, his silhouette framed in fire. She stayed inside with the child, heart pounding, but when one intruder broke through the window, she raised a rifle he had taught her to use and fired. The man fell, and she realized with trembling clarity that she had chosen life over fear. Outside, the battle raged. He fought with fists and steel when bullets ran dry, his body a storm of motion in the snow. Blood stained the ground. Smoke choked the air. Wolves howled from the edge of the clearing, as though summoned to witness the carnage. At last, only the ringleader remained, the man who had first cast her to the wolves. Their fight was brutal, knife against knife, both men grunting with exertion, snow turning red beneath them. For a moment, it seemed the mountain man would fall, pinned beneath the outlaw's weight, blade pressing to his throat. Then a shot cracked through the night. She stood in the doorway, rifle smoking, her eyes fierce. The outlaw collapsed lifeless beside the man he had nearly slain. Silence followed, broken only by the baby's cry. She dropped the rifle, running to his side, fear that he had been mortally wounded gripping her throat. But he rose slowly, bloodied yet alive, and met her eyes with something beyond gratitude. It was recognition, the shared knowledge that they had saved each other. The cabin was ruined, flames consuming what little safety they had built. Yet as dawn broke, painting the snow in hues of gold and rose, they stood together with the child between them. He touched the baby's cheek with rough fingers, voice hushed as he murmured, "Little one." It was the first time he had spoken to her directly, and in that word lay a promise greater than any oath. They rebuilt, not because the world had grown kinder, but because they refused to yield. Each log they raised together became a testament to survival, to defiance, to the possibility of new beginnings, even in a land that devoured the weak. She no longer looked at him as stranger, but as anchor, and he no longer carried his solitude as shield, but as burden shared. One evening, as firelight flickered across their faces, she laid a hand against his cheek. "You saved us," she whispered. His hand covered hers, callous skin warm against her palm. "Maybe you saved me too," he said, voice low. No kiss followed, no declaration. But in the silence, something stronger took root. The baby laughed then, a sound bright as bells against the hush of night. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, but their cries no longer carried threat. They were simply part of the wild, witnesses to a story written in blood, fire, and survival. And so the tale reached its end, not with riches or glory, but with a man who kept his vow and a woman who learned her own strength. The cabin in the mountains became more than shelter. It became a home forged through pain and healed by resilience. Travelers who passed near those woods would sometimes claim to hear a child's laughter mingling with the howl of wolves and the steady rhythm of an axe against wood, a reminder that even in the harshest wilderness, hope can take root. This story ends here, yet lingers, as all campfire tales do, asking listeners to carry its embers forward. For in the Wild West, where storms rage and wolves circle, sometimes the fiercest battles are not fought with bullets, but with the courage to begin again.